Good afternoon, everybody, and a particular welcome both to our physical audience here and our Zoom audience. Can I just say a domestic thing to our Zoom audience? At the end, there will be an opportunity for questions. So what we'd like you to do is to click the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen and click it again, and then you'll be able to type your question, which I'll be able to receive and relay to our speaker. It's a great pleasure to welcome James Perowne to us this morning. James has had a most distinguished naval career, as I think pretty well everyone in the audience knows. In submarines, commanding the submarine flotilla, the frigate flotilla, and becoming Deputy Supreme Commander of North Atlantic. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you here. And of course, it's very topical since the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh that you are sort of involved in organising that also. Well, so it's a double reason for welcoming you.
Thank you very much, Henry.
So please welcome our speaker, James Perowne.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here and speak to you. And as Hamish and Chris said, I know most of the audience, so I should kind of at least half, if not more. And it's nice to have another Deputy Supreme Allied Commander and former Ian Garnett, who was my predecessor in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm going to talk to you this morning. It's a lecture in two halves. The first bit is about the castle itself, and the next bit is about how I became Constable and Governor and what it means to be the Constable and Governor of the castle. Oops, is that going to work?
One moment, please. Okay, it should work.
Yeah. Windsor Castle is the oldest and largest continually inhabited castle in the world. It's been very much modified over the ages, and I will show you some of the major modifications in my talk. It is Her Majesty's home, and all of us who work and live in the castle are very conscious of that. This isn't like Buckingham Palace, which is the office, or Balmoral or Sandringham, which are sort of, Sandringham certainly is a sort of holiday home. Balmoral is her official, semi-official Scottish residence. And she goes up there each summer and does her Scottish visits from Balmoral. So we are very much home. And of course, for the last year, in fact, 14 months, Her Majesty has been living almost continuously in Windsor Castle. And we've had the Royal Standard flying over the castle all the time. Just to remind you about the Royal Standard, it flies only when she's in residence. Now, her being in residence doesn't mean she's in the castle. If she's just going to London for the day, the Standard will stay here. Sometimes it moves with her for official events, sometimes it doesn't. I'm always very proud, and I always look every morning when I'm taking our dog out into the garden for early morning ablutions and look up. There's something lovely about seeing that flag flying. One of the quirks of the Royal Standard is it can never be half-masted. So in the Duke's funeral, it stayed fully masted, right at the top of the mast. It also did, if you remember, for the awful week after Diana was killed, and that caused a furore. The Sun and the Mail and so on got all upset about it, and so and didn't understand you can't half-mast the Royal Standard. So whereas before you either had the Royal Standard flying or you had a bare pole, you now have the Union Jack flying when the Queen is not in residence, and clearly that can be half-masted. And of course, for the week of mourning before the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral, it was half-masted. The castle was built by William the Conqueror in about 1080, so very shortly after the Battle of Hastings. We're one of 7 castles that surround London, all based on the Tower of London. So you built the Tower of London first, which is about the lowest crossing point of the Thames, and then 7 castles, all 1 day's march, or approximately 25 miles from the Tower of London to defend London, because even then London was a major city in Britain. And so we are very old. When it was first built, it was made of wood. If you see the motte or the mound, really has not changed much. Obviously, the round tower was not round in those days, and it was made of wood, and around it was wooden houses and a wooden stockade. And as you can see, it was in the middle of nowhere. It was very clever because it is on a little mound, apart from one that built by man. It's actually on the biggest hill, not that there are any very large hills here in this part of Berkshire. But it's also on the twist in the Thames. And as you can see, the Thames surrounds the castle on about 3 sides.
Could we dim the light because the
yes, do switch that one. I don't need it. It is a bit. That's better. Yeah. So it was known as, because there's nothing around it, but it's a very clever site to choose. It was known as the castle near Windsor, and Windsor was Old Windsor, and there's still a place called Old Windsor, but sadly, if you go to Old Windsor, it's not very old, because it was a Saxon town, and therefore being wooden, it's all pretty much all gone. There's a few bits left. And round the castle developed a town gradually over the years, because the castle gave security and it gave employment, and therefore people congregated around the castle. In about 1080, so 100 years later, it was rebuilt in stone. And the first bit to be rebuilt in stone was not the round tower, but it was the stairs or steps going up to the round tower. They had to build them first and then build the round tower. Now, do please note the height of the round tower in this picture. And it's much lower than it is today. And you can see the mound is still there. The walls have started to go up and are looking remarkably like the walls we still have, certainly on the east side, the side nearest the front of the picture. I think you recognize that elevation pretty well. And then a bit later, another 100 years later, you can now see the round tower, you can see the motte, you can see the Saxon chapel here. And our house, it wasn't actually quite built then, but it's there now. And that arch is there. My office is just above that arch. But the house was built a bit later. So if you look, it really is starting. This is, we're talking about 1250, 1300. And it really is starting to look like the castle that we know today. Another 100 years. And there were, I'm sorry, I've lost my track here. I'll just put up all these kings because we'll talk about them in a minute. The castles only had 2 sieges. One was in 1193 and the other one was in 1216, both against King John. And in both cases, the castle held. You may think this is not a good thing with King John. The last one, as I say, was the summer of 1216. And of course, King John died in October 1216. This was because he put his Great Seal on the Magna Carta, but did nothing to distribute it. And so the barons went back to force him to put the Magna Carta out around the country. Although we've had 40 monarchs on the throne since 1080, and most have used Windsor Castle as a royal residence, not quite all, there's some in particular that have been credited with making the largest contribution to its development. We have obviously William I, we have Edward IV, Charles II, and finally George IV. And the evolution of the castle was done mainly by those, and also possibly Henry VIII, but he was more the chapel than the castle, had a big influence on the transition of the castle from being just a defensive structure to becoming a royal residence. We've discussed William I. The only interesting fact about William I, people don't know, is he died, he was grossly overweight, and the pommel of his saddle ruptured his spleen when he was riding one day, and he died on his horse. So just an interesting little side snippet. So he didn't have a magnificent death, sadly. I'm not going to do the fourth contribution because that was mainly in the chapel, and we'll come to that a little bit later. Charles II, after the restoration of the monarchy, did a huge amount in the state departments. He was a grand man and a great art collector, and transformed the state departments. And basically, they're the apartments that you see today reflect Charles II. He had Antonio Verrio paint 7 allegorical ceilings, of which only 3 now remain. There they are. Sadly, George IV and William IV didn't like them and had them taken down and covered over with a more normal sort of type modern ceiling, which is a great shame. But the ones that are there are in very good condition now. They've just been redone, and it's not quite perhaps the painted hall in Greenwich, but they're not far off. Charles II also created one of the country's most iconic vistas, known as the Long Walk. 2.5 miles long, lined with a double row of elm trees, although now some are chestnuts now. And George IV had a statue of his father on a horse at the far end, which is known as the Copper Horse. The insignia on the Copper Horse says how much he was in awe of his father and how well he had looked after him. It was a bit of a lie. It was a bit of a Martin Bashir moment, I think, by George IV. But the Copper Horse is a very distinct and lovely statue, and very well sighted. At the end of the camera would have been at the Copper Horse in this picture. And there you see the eastern elevation of the castle. You see what I mean? It really hadn't changed dramatically since it was first built. There's the Copper Horse, and it is a lovely statue. George IV also built what's known as the Inner Hall, which has now just been reopened. The Victorians made it into a whole bunch of storerooms and goodness knows what, and they've just completely taken it all down and put it back to how it was in George IV. As you come into the castle from the north terrace, that view through that door is what you see. And now the Inner Hall's opened up. So you can see from as you walk into the castle, you went up a few steps into the Inner Hall, you then looked straight down and all the way along the Long Walk. And George IV did that to impress his guests, to show how wonderful he was. And it is a good thing. There is the Inner Hall in its new splendor. That's only been done in the last year. What about George IV? He emptied the treasury and is therefore well remembered. No one remembers the kings that didn't empty the treasury. If you look at poor Queen Anne, who was pretty poverty stricken, had a terrible reign and a terrible time physically, of course, as you know, she had 17 dead babies. And she's really rather a forgotten monarch. But George IV is very much remembered. And he was, of course, also known as the regent because his father sadly had this mental or physical, no one's really quite sure what was wrong with him, but for his last 20 years on the throne, he was pretty gaga. And he was ensconced in what is now the Royal Library in Windsor Castle. If you look at the round tower now, do you see how much taller it is than that first picture? And you see that line halfway up it. Well, that's how tall it was. And George IV doubled its height. And he added a floor to just about every building in Windsor Castle. If you go to the castle, and now I've told you that, you'll notice it. You'll see the old line of the sort of where the roof would have been and how there's an extra floor. Our house was changed from a beautiful symmetrical 9-windowed Queen Anne's house into a thing that now looks like a barrack block. And our bedroom was actually only put on in about 1860. So it was a bit later than the rest of the house was built. So George IV changed the castle into almost a fairy tale medieval castle. That's what he wanted it to look like, and he got that. Out of interest, where those lovely trees are is our garden. One room which was created by his brother, William IV, is the Waterloo Chamber. And the Waterloo Chamber dates from about 1834 and celebrates the downfall of Napoleon. And it has all the politicians and the generals and kings who were responsible for the downfall of Napoleon. Interesting in there is Pope Pius VII. And you think, why is the Pope there? Well, Napoleon, rather stupidly, when he was being crowned by Pope Pius, grabbed the crown and put it on his own head and said, only I can crown myself. Well, that meant he had the whole Catholic Church against him as well as everybody else. So it wasn't a very sensible move. The Waterloo Chamber is at the moment being refurbished, and we're really looking forward to seeing what it's going to look like when it's done. But it's a very well used room. It's used for concerts, receptions, dinners. The table as seen on that photograph is sort of laid out for Garter Day. The picture you can see right above the door is, I think that, Duke of Wellington, and it's all the paintings, just about all, were done by Sir Tom Lawrence. And one visitor said to me, "It's extraordinary, they've all got the same name, they're all Lawrence." And I said, "No, that's the painter." One of the rooms with the biggest amount of bling in it is the Crimson Drawing Room. Again, well used by Her Majesty for pre-dinner receptions. Through that white door at the far end is the state dining room. And that's where the Queen does things called dine and sleeps. This is where the great and good of the country come and they have a drink with the Queen, then they have to go and change. They give them 40 minutes to change. It takes them 20 minutes to refine their bedroom. The wife has to change them a half a minute into her evening dress, and then they got to find their way back to the Crimson Drawing Room, and then they have a dinner. Nicola and I went, and we were very lucky. We had Mark Carney, we had the Archbishop Welby, we had Dame Maggie Smith. I mean, these are wonderful people, and it's a really good evening. And but that room, I think, I've sort of got used to it. When I first saw it, I couldn't believe it. You'd think it's something Lady Gaga would have, but the Green Drawing Room is not open to the public. The door is open and you can peer in. That room was used for lots of photographs, and of course was used for the photograph of Harry and Meghan on their wedding day in May 2018. And but it's not actually, the public aren't allowed in it. Again, it's a well-used room. And again, when the Queen entertains, it's right next door to the Crimson Drawing Room. Both rooms are sort of open and used. Now, what about the Great Fire? The fire started on the 20th of November, 1992. And it started here. Do you see the curtain on the left-hand side? At the top of the curtain, they were doing electrical work, and somebody left a light on, and someone may have put something against the bottom of the curtain and pushed it back. And the curtain set fire right at the top, the left-hand curtain right at the top started the fire. To show you what that room looked like afterwards, that is the same picture a few days later. The fire got up into the roof rafters, and having got into the roof rafters, there was no fire break. The roof was one continuous sort of void, and the fire got into that void, and of course it made off like a wind tunnel, and it ripped through the castle. I'm just going to go back. That's a picture. If you see, the fire started about here. This is St. George's Hall, no roof on it at all. This is the grand reception room, no roof on it at all. Under here is the Crimson and Green Drawing Room. The Crimson Drawing Room was completely destroyed. The Green Drawing Room, which is here, was very water damaged, but not quite so badly damaged. Here is the State Dining Room down here. that was completely destroyed. And this is the Brunswick Tower, which is the famous picture of the fire looking like a chimney, with flames shooting out of the top here. I want to point something out to you. I'm sorry, those on Zoom, you'll have to, right at the back of the photograph, there's a sort of white roof. That is the roof of the Waterloo Chamber. And it was not destroyed. The reason was that the Waterloo Chamber, being built much later in about 1830, was not on the roof void. It was an old open courtyard and had its own separate roof. So the firemen could keep that roof damp and stop the fire spreading to it. The problem with this bit was just the same as they had in Notre Dame a couple of years ago, whenever it was, where the fire got into the roof timbers and you cannot put them out because the water just drains through the roof timbers. And so what they did is they pushed the fire into the Brunswick Tower. And I was showing around a fireman once, and I showed him that picture of the Brunswick Tower with flames coming out of the top. And he said, they had the fire under control then. I said, did they? He said, yes, they pushed it into a corner and now they can put it out. But you can see the amount of damage was extensive. So I have to go through those ones again. That is the old roof of St. George's Hall. That's how it looked after the fire. Now, if you look closely, the roof is completely gone, but look down. The paneling at the bottom of the detritus on the deck is awful. It's undamaged. A lot of it is still original. And so the fire was very much up in the roof, not a general fire throughout all the rooms. So in a lot of cases, the rooms survived quite well. That ceiling, Prince Charles was always complaining about. He didn't like it, but he got his way because that's the new ceiling. It's in green oak and it's much lighter, brighter. It's got a bigger sort of arch to it. And St. George's Hall really looks magnificent. The grand reception room, again, you can see the ceiling's completely gone. There's 3 chandeliers in the grand reception room. 2 fell down. They weren't a problem because they survived. They were broken, but they knew how to put them back together again. 1 did not fall down, and look what happened to it. It got completely melted, bent. That was the difficult one to repair. That's St. George. Sorry, that's a grand reception room now, and you can see it's a magnificent room. They regilded it, and it looks absolutely fabulous. St. George's Chapel, the chapel you see in that picture, which is very much the chapel we have today, is pretty much the chapel started by Edward III and expanded by Edward IV, but the modern chapel is Henry VIII. So basically about 1550. And it's a huge, huge chapel, the size of a cathedral. Now, interesting, a quick story about Henry VIII while you look at this picture. We'll start with Cardinal Wolsey, Henry VIII's, what's it called, Lord Chamberlain. He had grand ideas, Wolsey. So he had built, or started to have built, this massive mausoleum that was going to be his resting place, and it would be magnificent. So he started building it, but he actually died in disgrace, being brought south, and he died in Leicester. But unlike Richard III, he probably is under that car park, but no one knows where he is, so he's lost. He has nothing to mark his grave, nothing. So Henry VIII took over the bits of the mausoleum that he had built, and he brought them down to Windsor. Well, when Henry VIII died, he was a tyrant, and like most tyrants, once you're dead, no one really likes you very much. So Henry VIII is placed in this rather grotty little crypt, alongside his true love of Jane Seymour. So you've got Henry VIII in the middle there with all those stones on top of his coffin. You've got the darker coffin as Jane Seymour. The other lighter coloured coffin, the other side, is Charles I with his head sewn back on, and his head was sewn back on the kitchen table in the deanery. And the dean still has that table, not in his kitchen, I hate to do it. But if you look at the dark coffin, you'll see there's another little coffin. Do you see resting on top of it? That's one of Queen Anne's dead babies. So Henry VIII didn't at all get what he wanted. He's in a really rather grim little hole under the main aisle of the choir of the chapel. And it was only opened up in about 1888 because it had a roof fall, as you can see. and the architect had to go in and redo the roof of this little crypt. So poor old Henry VIII, not a happy man. Now, I'm a Navy man, and do you know who now is in the sarcophagus of the mausoleum that was built by Cardinal Wolsey? Admiral Lord Nelson. Go down to the crypt of St. Paul's Cathedral next time you're in London, and you'll see everyone's in grey granity sort of sarcophaguses or tombs, and there is this bling, black marble, gold, and that, of course, was Wolsey's, but now Admiral Lord Nelson's in it. So us Navy men were pleased with that. This is the mausoleum put up in Frogmore in the home park by the Queen Victoria, and she and Albert are in there on their own. It's been under major repair. I've never been in it. They've just taken down all the scaffolding, and Nicola and I think, are very keen to go and have a tour. In front of it is that lawn, and a lot of the minor royals are now buried by the mausoleum. One of the people there is the Duke of Windsor, ex-Edward VIII. Here's a picture of St. George's and the banners of the Knights of the Garter. There are 24 elected Knights of the Garter. In fact, at the moment, I think we're down to about 19. I haven't counted actually, because we keep doing it. We haven't had a Garter Day for 2 years because of COVID, and before that, because Theresa May decided to have the opening of Parliament on that day. The Knights of the Garter came into being under Edward the III in 1348, and because they were out jousting and protecting his kingdom, they were at high risk. So that's a picture of Garter Day, which happens, which won't happen this year. It would normally happen the Monday of Royal Ascot Week in the middle of June. He had 24 poor knights who had lost all their money, probably lost their lands to the French as a ransom. And these 24 knights had to spend 3 2-hour sessions a day in chapel praying for their Knight of the Garter, because they believed if you were prayed for before you died, you sped through purgatory and went straight to heaven. Well, Elizabeth I ran out of money. She cut the 24 to 12. There are still 12 poor knights, but they're not called poor knights anymore. They're called the Military Knights of Windsor. Queen Victoria changed their name, and they live in this little terrace house right opposite St. George. And they're a great force for good in the castle. And they don't have to go out every day, but they do have to go to matins on Sundays when St. George's School is in term time. And they get very dressed up. They look very smart. The insignia of the Knights of the Garter there, Knights of the Garter complained that unless they're in their full robes and everything, or able to wear a star, they have no other insignia. There's no medal that goes with it. There's no neck order. And they're beginning to grump that unless they're in their full finery, no one knows they're Knights of the Garter. I haven't spoken to Mike Boyce about it, Ian, but maybe we should. And finally, investitures. Queen there investing somebody. You can see me at the back there. I'm reading out the names. And that was done as ever in the Waterloo Chamber. Again, we haven't had any investitures for the last 18 months because of COVID. I'm not sure when they're going to restart. At the moment, if you get an honour, I'm afraid it comes in the post. I found the Navy in 2002 after being Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic after Ian Garnett. And we set up and lived in a house in Leicestershire. I think I'm the only admiral currently living or having a house in Leicestershire. There were 2 of us. In March 2014, so some 12 years later, I was running down a sort of portfolio career of many different appointments and starting to think about settling into full retirement, when I got an email saying, "Do you want to apply for the post of Constable and Governor of Windsor Castle?" I thought Nicola would not really want to move because she was settled into the village. She had a horse riding, she had a golf, she had a bunch of nice ladies that they socialized with and had many friends. Well, I finally plucked up the courage to say I'd got this email and what did she want to do? thinking that she might say no. Well, she said very sensibly, if you don't take this, we're going to spend the rest of our life thinking, what would we be doing if we were Constable and Governor of Windsor Castle? And of course, that was very sensible. So I applied and came to Windsor for a formal job interview with a panel of 3 senior household staff and the Dean of St George's Chapel, which all seemed to go okay. A couple of days later, I was walking our dogs on the canal towpath, where I got a mobile phone call saying, what are you doing next Thursday? I didn't have my calendar with me, so I said, what's this for? I don't know. Well, the Queen wants to see you. Well, you don't say no to that. So I went down to Windsor again the following week and had a 20-minute interview with the Queen and the Duke. I'm not going to go through it in great detail, but the first question was from the Queen, have you seen the house? Yes, Your Majesty, I have. Has your wife seen the house? No, Your Majesty, she hasn't. It hasn't been time. Oh, said the Queen, that's very dangerous. And then she said, is it all right? Well, I'm English, you know, first time, absolutely fine, Your Majesty. Are you sure? So then you give the proper answer. And the proper answer was that the kitchen was absolutely terrible. I didn't quite say that. I just said the kitchen was looking very tired and I'd try and get it replaced. Well, after 20 minutes, mainly the Duke talking about how he was at Dartmouth College with my father, the interview ended and I left the room, and the master of the household, who was another Admiral, Tony Johnson Burt, went in. Tony came out a few minutes later, the double thumbs up, you've got the post, they both like you. And he said, I understand your kitchen needs replacing. And it was, and we've got a very, very smart kitchen. It was very well done. So if you need a good project manager, get a manager to do it. So here I am, the Constable and Governor of Windsor Castle, and now I live in a house which has 2 turrets, 9 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, 2 drawing rooms, and a dining room that easily seats 30, and all over the Norman Gate, right in the centre of the castle where I showed you. The moat garden is also ours, but it is very overlooked when there are visitors in the castle. There never, ever was water in the moat. It's chalk, so the water just drains out. My terms of reference tell me, and I quote, I'm to act as the official representative of the Queen at Windsor Castle. The incumbent does not have executive authority over those who work and live in the castle. Nevertheless, the Constable and Governor plays a highly influential role in fostering positive relations between the many elements that constitute the castle community. Secondly, the Constable and Governor is a principal link between the castle and the royal borough. So I'm now president of 7 charities or societies, vice president of 2 and chairman of 1 and a trustee of 4 others. I say it's like being an admiral, but without the day job, but sadly it's also without the outer office. So I have to do all the security passes, seating plans, menus, normally myself. In the summer, we hold receptions for between 60 and 70 people, most weeks for charities. And in the winter, dinners for anything up to about 30. Plus we do a number of small lunches and tea given away to charities to auction. Our very best dinner was for the Thames Hospice, which has just moved to new premises. And we raised $250,000 for a local hospice in 1 dinner. But I've got to tell you, that's not usual. It's an old post dating right back to the start of the castle in 1080. The first incumbent was Walter Fitzover, and there have been a number of bishops and at least 2 archbishops of Canterbury. In 1191, William de Longchamp, or Longchamp, depending whether French or English, was Chancellor of England. He seized the office from the Bishop of Durham. He in turn was ousted a year later by the Earl of Arundel. De Longchamp again seized the office, but was again ousted by Hubert Walter, Archbishop of Canterbury. And although a great post to have, I cannot see there's a queue at the gate, at Henry VIII's gate, waiting to take over for me. There's been 1 woman in the post, and that was in 1248, when Peter of Geneva died, and his widow, Maud de Lacy, succeeded him, but did stay in office for a further 8 years. I'm sure there will be another woman at some point in the future. There have been some constables who have fallen from grace, the most well-known being Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, who was banished from the court of Queen Elizabeth in 1578 and died impecunious 10 years later. In Victorian times, the post was given mainly to members of the royal family, including Prince Albert, the Prince Consort, from 1843 till his death in 1861. And the last of these aristocrats was the Earl of Athlone, also, and perhaps better known as the Prince of Teck, who was Queen Mary's brother. He was here from 1931 until 1957, a total of 96 years. I remember asking Her Majesty, was he often at the castle? Did she, meet him here often? And she said, I don't think he ever came to the castle. So in those days, it was an honorary appointment, and there was a deputy governor who did the work. The post was gapped after the Earl of Athlone died in 1957 until 1964, when it was altered to be filled by senior military officers, and the first of these was Field Marshal Viscount Slim. Bill Slim had a full house in knighthoods, all at the Grand Cross level. He was a Knight of the Garter, Knight Grand Cross of the Order of the Bath, Knight Grand Cross of St Michael and St George, Knight Grand Cross of the Victorian Order, Knight Grand Cross of the British Empire, plus he had a DSO and an MC. I reckon that meant he had 5 sashes he could put on any morning. And the 9th military officer to hold the post, there have been 2 Army, 3 Navy, and 4 Air Force. Sadly, 3 have died in post or had to leave the post terminally ill. So to guard against this, Nicola and I had the house blessed in a very moving ceremony by the Dean and an ex-naval chaplain, Martin Pole, who's the Queen's personal chaplain, shortly after we moved in, and they did a lovely job, and so far, touch wood, it's worked. We've had a most wonderful time in Windsor, with celebrations of the longest reign, the Queen's 90th birthday. Hold on. The Queen's 90th birthday, and one of her presents was from Michel Roux, who's the owner of the Waterside Inn at Bray, one of the very famous restaurants of Britain, which was a private dinner for 10. Well, Nicola and I were invited along with the Dean and his wife, and there were the other members were the 6 members of the royal family. So we had the Queen, Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Andrew and Eugenie, Prince Edward and Sophie, and the Dean, myself, and Dean, his wife, and Nicola and myself. It really was, talk about a glittering evening. It's not often you sit in a private dinner with Eugenie calling the Queen Granny. And it really was quite an evening. And even the Dean, who's been there a long time, he's been in Windsor for well over 20 years, when I said, would you like to come off your high and come and have a nightcap in our house, because we had to walk past our house to get back to the deanery, he said, yes, I would. We were also invited to the Queen and Duke of Edinburgh's 70th wedding anniversary, which was another truly glittering occasion. St George's Hall was lined with trees, and the dinner for about 150 was held in the Waterloo Chamber on 15 tables for 10 people, and each table had 2 members of the royal family sat at it. The table Nicola and I were on had Zara and Mike Tyndall. Zara calls Mike Tyndall Mikey, which always makes us giggle. And then, of course, great fun and a very normal couple, nothing pompous or Zara and Mikey, really good news. The entertainment was by Joanna Lumley with Richard Stilgoe and his son, so it was really high-class entertainment. They were very funny. Finally, we went to the grand reception room for champagne. The Queen's actually got her own champagne grown in the Great Park, and the first cuvée had just come out then. And we toasted the Queen and the Duke with this new cuvée of champagne. There was a huge ice sculpture. I mean, it was as tall as this roof, really big ice sculpture in the room. And Princess Michael was taking a photo of it with her mobile phone. I said, oh, it's all right for you, Your Royal Highness, you're allowed to take photographs, but we've been banned from bringing our mobile phones into events like this. Oh, she said, what's your email address? So I gave it to her, and she sent me the thing there and then, which I've still got. We also had the visit of President Trump, which the press, I've got to say, President Trump was fine when I met him. I'm not saying I support everything he did, but on the day he was absolutely fine. And the press got reporting absolutely diametrically wrong. The president, of course, arrived on time because we, the royal household, made absolutely certain that everyone arriving to see the Queen arrives on time. And the press reported as being 10 minutes late. It wasn't. The Queen was very agitated about this visit and came out 10 minutes early and was going around the dais like a cat on a hot tin roof with the comptroller, Andrew Ford, trying to calm her down, saying, imagine, relax, it's all going to be all right. It'll be fine, you know. So So that's why the press got that wrong. And the other thing is, just a week or two before, the Duke of Edinburgh said he was stopping all public duties. Well, one of his public duties was to act as the accompanying officer to an inspecting officer. Now, Trump was the inspecting officer, and normally the Duke of Edinburgh would walk a pace behind him and walk down the line of the guard when they inspected it. Well, of course, the Queen had to do that because there was no one else. And President Trump was confused. He didn't like walking in front of the Queen, and I don't blame him. So he kept stopping. And I could hear the Queen saying, "No, Mr. President, you go first, you go first." So that's why you had that sort of what looked like an argy-bargy between the Queen and Trump. It was Trump being too polite rather than Trump being rude. And finally, we come to the bit that I call 4 weddings and a funeral. The weddings we had, of course, were Prince Harry and Meghan, Princess Eugenie and Jack Broxbank, who are a really nice couple. They've just had a baby August. Lady Gabriella Windsor, another very nice wedding. That's Prince Michael and Princess Michael's daughter. And finally, Princess Beatrice. Princess Beatrice's wedding, though, wasn't in St. George's due to COVID and was in the little chapel in the park. And obviously, we had no part in it at all. But we did go to that chapel the next day, and we saw the flowers and how it was a beautiful wedding. And both the Queen and the Duke, there were only 30 guests, same as today. And so it was a very personal wedding, and I think they thoroughly enjoyed it. And of course, the funeral was, of course, we had a month ago, Duke of Edinburgh. And I'm sure it was just how he would have liked it. He didn't want a big funeral. He kept saying, "I don't want a fuss, I don't want a fuss." But it was small but very moving, and a lot of his own plans and ideas were in it, especially the Land Rover hearse. And the story of that is, in 1954, when Land Rovers were really new, they had a Land Rover, and their Duke loved it. And he said to the Queen as a joke, "No, when I go, I'd like to be taken away in this Land Rover." Well, he wasn't in that Land Rover, but he then designed his own hearse Land Rover. Now, what's going to happen to that, I have no idea. But that was what he wanted, and he got it. Well, all this activity stopped in January 2020, and I've got to say we've done very little entertaining since then. I do a lot of Zoom calls for charity trustee boards, and we're both very much looking forward to opening up next month and having visitors back in the castle. We actually have our first sort of slightly formal lunch on Tuesday, but our first real charity lunch is at the end of June, and is for Prince Charles's general practitioner, who bought it in a charity auction about a year ago, and he's looking forward to coming with his family. Hopefully this summer we can get back to normal with a large backlog of receptions to complete. I hope that's given you some flavour of life at Windsor, and I'm ready for any questions, Hamish.
Engaging.
Yes.
It may have been before your times, but the Great Fire of '92. Would you agree that the new version of St George's Hall, beautiful oak roof, was rather better than the tacky thing that had been put up before in the 18th century?
Yes, I would. I mean, it's like most fires, they're devastating at the time. But actually, that end of the castle is a much better place since the fire. And it's not just St George's Hall. The private chapel, which is where the curtain that caught fire was, has gone, and that's been replaced by a known as the mental block. What's it, Nicola? The lantern lobby. And the Duke loved the lantern lobby in Ely Cathedral, and he wanted it copied. And the private chapel has gone into a much smaller room. It still seats about 15. It's not used very often. It has been used obviously during COVID because the Queen's been having private services in there, but normally it's not well used. So the whole end of the castle, and you saw the Crimson Drawing Room, look, talk about bling, the grand reception room, they're all looking much better. And so the one room that was looking a bit tatty was the Windsor, the Waterloo Chamber. And that is now currently being refurbished, and they've just happened to have hit COVID. They didn't mean to, but it's been out of action for a while, but it doesn't matter because we haven't had any visitors. So I'm looking forward to seeing when that's unveiled, what that looks like. But no, like most fires, in the end, it was better. What I didn't say is 20th November 1992, the Queen's and Duke's 45th wedding anniversary. They put the final medallion in the floor to say it was finished. It wasn't quite, but it was enough finished they can make a public display of it. And it was the 20th of November 1997, their 50th wedding anniversary. So what started as a disaster, their 45th wedding anniversary, ended in triumph on their 50th wedding anniversary.
And presumably there's no fire breaks in the roof.
I'm sure they're much more. I'm sure they've done it. And of course, the timber's not so old. And the roof of the St George's Hall is green oak, and it's all the green oak twists and cracks and looks fabulous. I mean, it really is a lovely, lovely room. At the back,
Christopher.
So James, thank you for that excellent talk. You are both the Governor and Constable Castle. Is there a difference in the two roles?
yes. The governor of the castle is exactly what it said. I mean, it's not anymore, but it would have been a different person who was literally just looked after the castle. The constable looks after the law in his area, and hence you have the constable of the Tower of London. And he had a much bigger purview. He would have had, I'm not quite sure what my total area is, but certainly the parks and the Great Park. Well, of course, that doesn't happen. And then Peel pinched the name constable and gave it to policemen because they look after the law in their area. I mean, it wasn't a misuse, but it slightly diminished the role. So technically they're two roles. One is as constable of the whole area, but no longer extant, that's gone. But I am governor of 13 acres of Berkshire. And the Lord Lieutenant, when he comes into my bit, is always very good and steps back and says, no, you're the Lord Lieutenant of these 13 acres. But I'm just inside the castle wall.
I have no Zoom questions at present. They're obviously mesmerised.
Or asleep.
I doubt that.
Anybody else?
Do you have any special uniform?
Oh, no, I wear, thank goodness, no tights, no dead chickens on my head. I just wear naval uniform and bearing on either the full high-necked Admiral's uniform, you know, the buttons makes you look a bit like Nelson, or the normal reefer jacket. But most of my day is spent in a suit or a blazer, and during COVID, chinos and a shirt. I mean, nothing's been happening. So yeah, so it's very relaxed. There's no dress code, thank
Judith, do you
I
have
was going to ask the same question.
a same question? As I said, what an engaging talk. I mean, a quick gallop through roughly all the kings and queens of England in the first half. and their relationship with the castle was so interesting. But also to hear what you had to do in the job as well. We're extremely grateful to you for coming down here all the way from Windsor and for giving us such an engaging talk. Thank you so much. Absolutely excellent.